The afternoon sun burned mercilessly over the jagged cliffs of Red Hollow Canyon. The land shimmered with heat, the sand dry and cracked beneath the hooves of Clint Maddox's mare. Clint, a rugged cowboy in his early 50s, wore a sweat-stained hat and a coat that had seen better years. He rode slow, eyes scanning the canyon walls. Something wasn't right. The air felt still, too still. Not a bird in the sky, not a breeze across the rocks. Just silence. That kind of silence always meant trouble out here. Then, without warning, a deep growl shattered the quiet. Clint stopped and slid off his horse, grabbing his rifle as he crouched low. He crept toward a rock formation ahead, boots crunching lightly in the dust. As he peeked around the sandstone edge, his breath caught in his throat. Just 30 feet away, a foal, small, trembling, barely able to stand, lay sprawled in the dirt. A fresh gash marked its side. Hovering over it was a mountain lion, its golden muscles tense, teeth bared, eyes locked on the helpless animal. The predator hadn't struck yet, but it was close. Real close. Clint didn't hesitate. He dropped the rifle, it was too risky at this range, and grabbed a thick, fallen branch. He stepped into the open and shouted, "Hey!" His voice echoed off the canyon walls. The puma snapped its head toward him, startled but far from scared. It snarled, its ears flat, tail lashing behind it. Clint raised the branch high, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. "Back off," he growled, taking another step forward. In a flash, the mountain lion lunged. Clint dove sideways as the cat's claws swiped the air where he'd just stood. He swung the branch with all his strength, connecting with the lion's shoulder. The wood cracked on impact. The big cat turned and snarled, crouching again. Clint backed away slowly, his hands empty now, sweat stinging his eyes. Behind him, the foal whimpered again. He knew he was out of time. Then, something strange happened. A sharp, high-pitched whistle echoed through the canyon. Not natural. Not wind. The mountain lion froze, ears flicking, head tilting slightly. Then, without warning, it turned and bolted into the rocks, vanishing like smoke. Clint stood there, stunned. He knew that sound. He hadn't heard it in years. Not since the night everything went to hell. Clint turned and rushed to the foal, gently placing a hand on its dusty neck. "Easy now," he whispered. But deep inside, something else stirred, an old fear. That lion didn't run from him. It ran because someone else made it. And Clint had a sinking feeling. Someone out there still remembered his name. The next morning, Clint stood at the edge of the canyon floor, staring down at a set of fresh paw prints in the dust. They circled the spot where the foal had lain, and then disappeared into the rocks. He'd camped nearby all night, rifle across his lap, eyes wide open. He hadn't slept a second. The whistle still rang in his ears, not just because it was strange, but because it was familiar. He couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had scared that mountain lion off wasn't natural. It was personal. The foal, now resting under the shade of a dry cedar, looked up at Clint with wide, trusting eyes. He'd managed to clean the wound with water from his canteen, and the bleeding had stopped. "You're tougher than you look, little guy," Clint muttered, brushing dust off the animal's side. He'd started calling him Roscoe. Something about the foal reminded Clint of a time long gone, a name his daughter, Ellie, once gave to every animal they found, whether it was a dog, rabbit, or even a frog. By noon, the heat had grown unbearable, and Clint decided to head toward the old ranger station nearby. It had been abandoned for years, but it still offered some shade, and a rain barrel that might have caught a bit of water. As he rode, Roscoe limped behind him, struggling but determined. Clint kept looking over his shoulder, not at the foal, but at the rocks. Watching. Waiting. The canyon felt alive, like eyes were hidden behind every ridge. When he reached the station, the door was hanging half off the hinges, creaking in the wind. Inside, it was cooler. Dust coated everything. Clint propped Roscoe in a corner with a blanket he found in the storage box. Then, from the shadows near the back wall, something moved. Clint spun around, rifle drawn. But it wasn't an animal. It was a man. "Easy, Maddox," said the figure, stepping into the light. It was Sheriff Ray Collier, his badge still pinned to the same worn leather vest he'd had for 20 years. His face was harder now, and the scar above his left brow had deepened. "Word is, you were seen out here yesterday. People heard gunshots. Thought you were long gone." "I was," Clint replied flatly, lowering the rifle but not relaxing. "Didn't plan on coming back. Something made me." The sheriff looked past Clint, toward Roscoe, then back to the cowboy's eyes. "And what would that be?" Clint hesitated, then said the one thing he hadn't spoken aloud in years. "A sound I thought I'd never hear again." Sheriff Ray leaned against the broken doorframe, arms crossed, eyes squinting at Clint like he was reading a book he'd already finished once before. "A sound, huh?" he repeated, voice low. "Lot of strange things happen in these canyons. You sure it wasn't just the wind playing tricks on you?" Clint didn't answer. He just stared out the window at the horizon, where the red cliffs met the sky. Deep down, he knew better. That whistle hadn't been wind. It had a pitch, a pattern, a memory. Roscoe stirred on the blanket in the corner, letting out a soft, pitiful whinny. Clint walked over and knelt beside him, running a hand along the foal's side. The wound was drying, but the animal was still weak. "He's lucky to be alive," Clint said quietly. "You ever seen a mountain lion run from a man with a stick?" Sheriff Ray didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was different, more careful. "Not unless it had a reason. Or unless something worse was nearby." That's when Clint mentioned the whistle, how it had come from nowhere, stopped the mountain lion in its tracks, and triggered a memory he couldn't bury. Sheriff Ray didn't laugh. He didn't mock it like most would've. Instead, he nodded slowly, like he'd heard it too once upon a time. "I remember a sound like that," he said. "Back in '97, after the fire. Right before your daughter disappeared." Silence fell like a heavy curtain. Clint stood slowly, his jaw clenched. "You don't talk about her," he said, eyes sharp. "Not unless you've got something new to say." Ray raised his hands in peace. "I'm just saying, that sound? It was around back then too. The night she vanished. Some folks said they heard it echoing through the hills for hours after. Nobody could explain it. Nobody tried." The old pain stirred in Clint's chest like a hot coal. Ellie, 17, wild-hearted, too smart for this dusty town. Gone without a trace. Her name still burned like it had just happened. A sudden knock at the broken door startled them both. They turned, and there stood Doc Randall Green, the local vet, holding a leather bag and looking worn from the ride. "Heard you had an injured foal," he said, stepping inside without waiting for permission. "And a strange story to go with it." Clint and the sheriff exchanged a glance. Doc Green had always been more than just a vet. He listened more than he spoke, and he remembered everything. As he knelt beside Roscoe, he looked up with a furrowed brow. "Where exactly did you say this happened?" he asked. Clint didn't blink. "Same place Ellie disappeared." That night, Clint sat alone by the fire behind the ranger station, staring into the flames like they could somehow burn through time. Roscoe slept nearby, wrapped in an old canvas, his breathing shallow but steady. Doc Green had done what he could, stitched the wound, cleaned the infection, but it would be a long recovery. Sheriff Ray had ridden out before sunset, saying he'd checked the county records. But Clint knew better. Ray wasn't looking for files. He was chasing ghosts. Same as him. As the fire crackled, Clint pulled a small object from his coat pocket, an old, dented silver harmonica. It hadn't touched his lips in years. It had belonged to Ellie. She used to play it while riding bareback around the ranch, laughing, hair flying wild in the wind. He remembered the last night he heard it. She was sitting on the fence under a harvest moon, playing a tune she'd made up. The next morning, she was gone. A sudden noise broke the quiet. Not an animal. Not the wind. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, approaching from the ridge above. Clint stood, rifle in hand, muscles tense. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall and broad-shouldered, with a long coat and a familiar limp. Jed Harper. A name Clint hadn't spoken aloud in nearly a decade. They'd worked the land together once, built fences, raised cattle, shared silence like brothers. Until Ellie vanished. Until Jed left town with no explanation. "You're a hard man to find," Jed said, stopping at the edge of the firelight. "I wasn't hiding," Clint replied coldly, eyes never leaving him. "You were." Jed looked older, worn down by years of something heavier than time. His eyes weren't cruel, but they carried the weight of a secret he wasn't ready to speak. "I heard about the foal. About the mountain lion." He paused. And the sound. Clint's grip tightened on the rifle. "You know what it was?" Jed didn't answer. Instead, he pulled something from his coat, a small, metal whistle, dull and unremarkable in appearance, but Clint recognized it instantly. It was identical to the one Ellie had carried on her keychain. "You told me you lost it in the fire," Clint said, voice low, heart pounding. "I did," Jed whispered. "But last week, I found it again, hanging from a fence post, just like the night she disappeared." The fire popped loudly, sending sparks into the air. Clint's world tilted, not from fear, but from something far worse. Hope. Clint didn't take his eyes off the whistle. The silver was worn, edges dulled, but there was no mistaking it. Ellie had carved her initials into the side with a pocket knife when she was 12, EM, still faintly visible. Clint's throat tightened. "Where did you really find it, Jed?" he asked, the firelight casting hard lines across his face. Jed hesitated, then lowered himself onto a log across from Clint, the weight in his eyes matching the limp in his step. "A week ago, I was up near Devil's Backbone, checking on some old trap lines I forgot were even there. I saw movement near one of the ravines. Thought it was a coyote. But when I got closer, I found a piece of denim caught on the rocks. Torn. Faded blue, like the jacket Ellie always wore." He looked up slowly. And this whistle was hanging from a piece of rusted barbed wire. Like someone wanted it to be found. Clint's hands curled into fists. Devil's Backbone wasn't just a ridge, it was a place cursed by stories. Rumors of strange lights, voices in the dark, and people disappearing without a trace. Locals didn't go near it. Not anymore. Clint had avoided it for years, too afraid of what he might or might not find. But now, with Jed sitting across from him, holding a piece of his daughter's past, the fear turned into something sharper. Determination. "I should have told you back then," Jed muttered. "I knew she was meeting someone. She wasn't just wandering off like you thought. Ellie had secrets, Clint, and I didn't push her to share them." Clint's voice came out like gravel. "You think I didn't know? She was different those last few months. Distant. But every time I tried to ask, she shut down. I figured she was just growing up. I never thought." He trailed off, staring into the fire, the memories clawing their way back. Behind them, Roscoe stirred, letting out a faint cry. Doc Green, half asleep in the corner, opened one eye and sat up. "That foal's getting restless," he said. "Might be sensing something." Clint walked over to check on the animal, brushing its mane. Roscoe's ears twitched, and his eyes locked onto the dark canyon beyond the window. Then, from the stillness outside, came a sound Clint hadn't heard since Ellie vanished. The whistle. Again. Same pitch, same rhythm. But this time, it wasn't just echoing. It was close. Too close. Clint turned to Jed, heart racing. "We're not alone out here." The next morning, the desert wind carried a sharp chill. Clint saddled his horse in silence, eyes fixed on the horizon. He hadn't slept. None of them had. The whistle had sounded 3 more times during the night, always from different directions, always distant enough to question, but close enough to feel. By dawn, Clint had made up his mind. He was going back to Devil's Backbone. With or without backup. Jed tried to talk him out of it. "You're chasing ghosts, Clint. Whatever's out there, if anything, it's not gonna give you peace." Clint tightened the cinch on his saddle without looking up. "I'm not looking for peace," he said quietly. "I'm looking for the truth." Roscoe, now strong enough to stand on his own, stood beside the ranger station wall, watching Clint with wide, alert eyes. The foal didn't make a sound, but something about his stillness felt like a warning. Doc Green agreed to stay behind with Roscoe. Jed eventually climbed into his own saddle with a resigned sigh. "If you're going into hell," he muttered, "I guess I might as well come with you." They rode out just after sunrise, following the old creek bed that curved through the cliffs and climbed toward the ridge where Devil's Backbone loomed, sharp, black rocks jutting from the earth like broken teeth. As they approached the ridge, Clint slowed his horse. The land changed here, quieter, heavier. The air smelled different, like damp ash and something metallic beneath it. "It's too quiet," Clint said. Jed nodded. "It always was." They dismounted and moved on foot, weaving through narrow rock passes and dried brush. That's when Clint spotted it, a piece of blue denim, tangled in the thorns of a dead bush. He pulled it free, heart pounding. It was old, sun-bleached, but unmistakable. "It's hers," Clint whispered. Then Jed found something else, a set of boot prints, faint but fresh, leading deeper into the rocks. Too small for a man. Too straight for a wanderer. "She's been here," Clint muttered. "Or someone who wants us to think she has." The prints led them toward a narrow crevice between 2 massive boulders. The wind howled low through it, almost like a voice. Suddenly, from inside the shadows of the crevice, a figure moved. Both men froze. A silhouette, a woman, thin, long hair, standing still as stone. Clint's chest tightened. He took 1 step forward. "Ellie?" he said, voice barely audible. But before the figure could respond, it vanished. Clint stood frozen in the crevice's mouth. The image of the woman burned into his mind. She hadn't run. She had disappeared, like smoke in the wind. He stepped forward into the narrow gap between the rocks, ignoring Jed's warning behind him. The passage twisted and dipped, barely wide enough for 1 man. The air was cooler here, heavy with the scent of wet stone and something else, lavender. Ellie's favorite scent. He remembered it from her old bedroom, where she kept dried flowers in a glass jar beside her bed. He emerged into a small clearing, hidden between the canyon walls. It was silent. No birds, no wind, just the pounding of his own heart. And then he heard it. A soft humming. The melody was faint, but it sent a chill down his spine. It was the same tune Ellie used to play on her harmonica, the one she made up herself. His eyes scanned the rocks, searching for movement, a shadow, anything. "Ellie?" he called out, voice rough. "If you're out here, please." Jed caught up moments later, panting. "Clint, this place, it's wrong. You feel it too, don't you?" Clint nodded slowly. "She's here. Or something is." They moved deeper into the clearing and spotted a small structure tucked into the rock face, a shelter made from old timber and scrap metal. Someone had built it recently. There was a blanket inside, and next to it, a pair of boots, small, worn, and coated in dust. Clint picked one up, and his hands trembled. They were Ellie's. He knew it. The stitching. The size. She had worn them on her last trail ride. "She's alive," he whispered, barely believing the words. But before the hope could settle in, Jed pointed to something carved into the wooden wall. 3 letters, scratched deep and uneven. JHM. Clint's stomach dropped. Those weren't Ellie's initials. Jed stepped back, face pale. "That's not just her shelter," he said. "Someone's been keeping her here. Watching her. Maybe even controlling her." Clint's mind raced, connecting fragments of memory, past warnings, and that whistle. Used not to call animals, but to signal something or someone. He felt sick. Then, they both turned sharply. The humming stopped, and in its place came a voice, soft, almost childlike, from behind the rocks. "Daddy?" Clint's heart seized. He spun toward the sound, eyes scanning every crevice. But all he saw was light shifting between the stones. No body, no face, just the echo of that voice, as real as the wind. And somehow, it was calling him deeper. Clint moved toward the sound like a man pulled by a current he couldn't fight. His boots crunched on gravel, his breath shallow. The canyon walls narrowed again, forcing him and Jed into a single line as they followed the faint echo of the voice. "Daddy?" It had sounded close, but now it was gone again. Just like the figure in the clearing. Just like the whistle. Everything slipping through his fingers. Again. They reached another opening in the rock, hidden behind a curtain of hanging moss and scrub brush. Clint pushed through first and froze. Inside was a small cave, cool and dry, lit only by slivers of daylight from cracks in the stone. But what stopped him wasn't the darkness. It was what he saw along the walls. Drawings. Dozens of them. Some were scratched in with sticks, others smeared with charcoal and dirt. Horses, trees, stars, and faces. One face repeated over and over. His. Jed stepped in behind him, staring at the cave with wide eyes. "She lived here," he muttered. "Or someone did. For a long time." Clint ran his hand along the wall, his fingers shaking as they traced a crude drawing of a man in a wide-brimmed hat. Below it, written in shaky letters, "I waited." The words hit him harder than any punch. He dropped his hand and stepped back. "She didn't leave," he whispered. "She was trapped. Or hiding." In the back of the cave was a pile of belongings. A tattered backpack, old blankets, empty cans. Clint crouched and opened the pack. Inside was a small, leather-bound journal, the pages stiff with dust. He opened it carefully. The handwriting was childish at first, then matured slowly. Page after page of thoughts, sketches, dates. Ellie had written them. No doubt. Her words spilled out like water from a dam. "Daddy doesn't listen. Daddy gets mad. But I know he loves me." Clint's throat tightened. "I heard the whistle again. It means I can't go home." Jed looked away, giving Clint space, but the damage was already done. Years of silence, distance, harsh words he thought she'd forgotten. All of it lived in those pages. She hadn't run. She'd felt pushed away. And someone, something, had taken advantage of it. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed from outside the cave. Gunfire. Jed rushed to the entrance, rifle raised. Clint stuffed the journal in his coat and followed. Below the ridge, smoke was rising near the ranger station. The place they'd left Doc Green and Roscoe behind. Clint's voice broke the silence. "Someone's trying to wipe the trail." Clint and Jed charged down the canyon path, the scent of gunpowder thick in the air. Smoke rose in dark plumes from behind the ridge, painting the sky in ominous shades of gray. As they rode fast across the uneven trail, Clint's heart pounded, not just from fear, but fury. Someone had gone back to the ranger station. Someone didn't want that foal or that journal alive. And Clint had a sick feeling it wasn't just about Ellie anymore. When they reached the clearing, the sight nearly dropped Clint to his knees. The old ranger station was on fire, flames licking at the wooden walls, windows shattered. Doc Green lay near the porch, dazed but alive, clutching a bloodied arm. Roscoe stood just beyond the smoke, limping but breathing, eyes wide with panic. Clint ran to them both, dropping his rifle. "Doc!" he shouted. "What the hell happened?" Doc coughed, blood on his lips. "Didn't see their face, just heard the whistle," he rasped. "Then a shot. They were looking for something, asked about the journal." Clint's stomach turned. The journal was still inside his coat, pressed against his chest. Whoever had come was desperate, organized, and still watching. Jed scanned the ridge with binoculars, then froze. "We've got company," he said, voice cold. Across the canyon, a black SUV was parked where no vehicle should have reached. And standing beside it was a woman, tall, pale, with long brown hair. She held something in her hand, a whistle. Clint's breath caught. She looked just like Ellie, but older, different, hardened. "That's her," he whispered. "It has to be." But the face wasn't one of fear or reunion. It was blank, emotionless. Then she raised the whistle to her lips and blew. No sound came out. But Roscoe collapsed. The foal shook violently, eyes rolling back. Doc gasped. Jed fired a warning shot into the air, but the woman didn't flinch. She simply turned, stepped back into the SUV, and the vehicle began rolling down the narrow path out of the canyon. Clint was already moving, shouting over his shoulder, "We're going after her." Jed hesitated. "Clint, what if that's not Ellie?" Clint didn't look back. "It is. I don't care what they've done to her. She's still mine." As the flames behind them roared louder, and the SUV disappeared into the winding canyon path, Clint mounted his horse and kicked hard, chasing the shadow of the daughter he'd lost, and the truth he was finally ready to face. Clint rode hard through the winding canyon path, Dusty's hooves pounding the dirt like a war drum. The black SUV had left a trail of dust, but it was slowing now, forced to crawl along the narrow terrain. Clint's jaw was set, heart thundering. The image of the woman, the whistle, her eyes, the silence in her face, burned in his mind. If it was Ellie, she was changed. If it wasn't, someone had taken her identity and used it like a weapon. He caught up near the edge of the ridge where the canyon dropped into a vast, open valley. The SUV had stopped. The woman stood waiting, as if she knew he would come. She held the whistle in one hand, the other behind her back. As Clint dismounted, he kept one hand near his belt, ready but not aggressive. "Ellie," he called softly. "Is it really you?" Her head tilted, just slightly, as if the name sparked something distant, buried. "I used to be," she said. Her voice was quiet, calm. "But that girl, she died in these rocks a long time ago." Clint stepped closer, his voice breaking. "You didn't die. You were taken, trapped, and I didn't come looking soon enough." She studied him, no emotion on her face. Then, from behind her back, she revealed the journal, the same one Clint had tucked in his coat. "This?" she asked. "You read it?" Clint nodded. "Every word." He stepped closer, eyes locked with hers. "I failed you. As a father. As a man. I let my silence push you away, and someone else filled that space with lies. But I never stopped loving you, Ellie." Her hand trembled, the whistle dropping to the ground with a soft clink. "They told me you forgot me," she whispered. "Told me you were glad I was gone." Her voice cracked for the first time. "I wanted to come home. I just didn't know how." Clint closed the distance between them and gently pulled her into his arms. For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind carried only the sound of breath and memory. Finally, Ellie collapsed into him, sobbing. Years of pain, silence, and confusion washed out of her in waves. Behind them, Jed arrived and watched from a distance, tears in his own eyes. That night, under the same stars Ellie had drawn in the cave, Clint sat beside a fire, not to mourn, but to begin again. Roscoe rested nearby, healed. Ellie slept for the first time in peace. And Clint, at last, felt something he hadn't known in years.